Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, in this video, I'd like to talk about splitting and rage. Okay, I personally see these two features as completely connected. Okay, and I think when you really look at the two items of splitting and rage, that really captures basically most of the symptoms I think of NPD and BPD. Okay, um, and of course, you have to be a little abstract to see that because I think even things like envy and all that, it comes from the split. Okay, the splitting is sort of an ideal. You sort of polarize the world into very idealized extremes, and I think from there, you get that intensified envy, and that's where the grandiosity and just putting other people down. So basically. If you look at splitting kind of in an abstract sense, I think it really captures basically both BPD and NPD. Okay, now it's interesting because when you see psychiatrists describing these disorders, they sort of say, well, on the one hand they have this splitting, and on the other hand they have this rage. It's kind of, and then when they try to kind of explain why they always show up together, why does the rage always show up with the splitting? It's kind of like it's kind of interesting how they explain that. I guess at best you might hear people say, well, it's because this is a more primitive position. Okay, and maybe the idea is that when you're in a more primitive position, I guess your emotions are more primitive, something like that. But I think I don't know. To me, that's kind of a cartoonish way to explain this, and I'm not sure that really explains in machine language why rage is always there with the splitting. Like, why does rage cause the splitting? I think they would probably say something like, "Well, you're in a more primitive position, so you see life in more primitive terms." Maybe that's what it is. But is that really the machine language? Is that just, or is that just using the word primitive just to say you're in a more, less developed part of your life? But then what does that mean? I mean, so I guess I still think they're not really fully explaining why rage and splitting really are connected. I mean, they are just the same operating machine language, the same, I guess, the same complex of system, the same complex neurological activity is basically producing both, you know. And I don't think it's satisfying just to say, well, it's just a primitive position, you know because I mean that doesn't really open the hood and tell you what's going on, mechanically. Um, so I guess I don't know. I like to look at things more from the machine language because I think that when we get into, let's say, the narration of what's happening, kind of the story of what's happening, I think that is kind of, I guess for me, that's kind of like that's one of the places where we sort of fall into, I don't know, kind of like a more childlike way of understanding. And I think there's a more emancipated way, I think, to understand these things where you just see it more in terms of machine language. You sort of lose your attachment, sort of somewhat. And somebody might say, well, isn't that a psychopathic way to look at it? You're just kind of reducing everything to machine language. You're depersonalizing everything. Well, you could see it that way, or you could also see it that, as we as we become hopefully adults, okay, we do want to get away from, I think, the childlike story, because I think the childlike story has a lot of baggage in it that is kind of running against us moving more into being emancipated, as emancipated beings. You know what I mean? And so I guess I don't see a taboo about being an emancipated being. Um, I don't think that's any denial of my authentic feelings, or my vulnerability. I'm not avoiding anything. I just think that I think sometimes I think psychology does encourage us to sort of revert back to childhood, because childhood is supposed to be very innocent, it's supposed to be very vulnerable. There's almost this religion that if you're sort of in a vulnerable, innocent place, you're sort of in the best possible place. And I think there's a middle ground where you're not just being like in denial. Like I don't advocate. I don't think anybody should be in denial, but I do think that there is a way to kind of grow up and not just be a baby your whole life. And without denying your feelings or your status, but and yet you can still move on to a more, I guess, a more emancipated way of just looking at things more in terms of machine language, and kind of taking sort of like the, I don't know how to say it, sort of taking the, I don't know, taking the emotionality out of life. I mean, I guess, there's a difference between having emotions and emotionality. I guess I want to see that difference. And I'm sure that I'm going to provoke people by now, because I think now people can sort of see that I'm sort of not really into the, you know, how would you say, like, I'm not really into the sentimental way of living, you know. And of course, it's funny because I mean, I have emotions. I have emotions, but I guess I just don't like to indulge in the emotional world as kind of like a sacred thing. I just kind of I just be neutral about it. You know, I have my emotions, but I don't like to put it on a pedestal. And I think maybe in some ways, I think it's kind of like that putting on the pedestal that we do, you know, in cluster B. I think sometimes we put the emotionality on a pedestal, like this is the salvation. You know, we have to be in the emotionality. And you know, sadly, this is almost giving credit. Like it almost looks like I'm giving credit to like the psychopathic perspective. But I think we all know that psychopathic lack of emotionality is kind of an avoidance. Okay, and what I'm talking about is not an avoidance, I'm talking about growing up. Okay, so there's different ways we can get to, let's say, the more machine language approach to the world, you know, kind of giving up the sentimental, kind of taking the emotionality down off the pedestal, you know. But yeah, the trick is, are we getting there through avoidance, or are we getting there through just courage, you know, just living and carrying the weight of all the emotional things in the world, you know. I have a funny feeling that real emotions don't look anything like emotionality. Okay. Emotionality is like how we imagine emotions are supposed to be. But I think true emotions are quieter, and I think they're more subtle than what we put on the pedestal. Okay. So with that in mind, I kind of want to take the sentimentality and the story out of, you know, kind of like say, you know, how a person develops their how would you say, like, sorry, I kind of want to take the emotionality and the story out of the, you know, sort of like, you know, why do we see rage and splitting as coming to as always coming together, you know, like why do they come in the same package, you know. And I kind of want to get away from this thing of like, well, it's just primitive, you know, that to me is kind of like this storytelling angle, you know. And just by saying something's primitive, I don't know that we're really explaining. Um, and I apologize to everybody. I'm sure half of what I say doesn't sound very coherent. And you know, I'm just expressing my, I don't know, the way I feel. I guess this is the way I feel. You know, so what I say is kind of a little bit incoherent. You know, but maybe there'll be one or two people that even watches this video. Um, and I don't know. I am trying to reach out. I am trying to reach out to people who have cluster B. Okay, so I probably won't reach too many, because I think a lot of cluster B people, honestly, they hold on to that thing that psychology holds on to, kind of idealizing the emotionality, the sentimentality, kind of idealizing this kind of infant, just like reversion to like some holiness of the infantile state where it's better to just be kind of very emotional. And I really believe that kind of emotionality is not the same as real emotions. Okay. I think real emotions are more sober. Okay. And there's a difference between sober emotions and idealized emotions. Okay. And I'm concerned that the idealized emotions is another narcissism that we are at risk to fall into, and that psychology will invite us to go into that, you know, idealized emotionality as opposed to sober emotions. Okay, and I think that sober emotions is more like being in the machine language world. Okay, but still feeling everything. Okay, it's not psychopathy. Psychopathy is a dissociated pseudo what do you call it? Psychopathy is a dissociated pseudo serenity, okay, which is not really being open and being with the machine language of the world. Okay, what I'm talking about is maybe closer to Zen. Okay, where you are there, you are with the burden of all the taxation of the environment, all the factors. Okay, but you're not trying to act into an idealized emotionality. You're just there being with all the dissonances and all the problems around you, and you're weighing them, they're burdening you. but you're not trying to live into, an ideal form of emotionality. Okay, so it's really more just the mosquitoes, and just the clutter and the unease of having a lot of factors and a lot of dissonances around you. It's just the strain, just the experience. And I think that's more like the Zen, and it's not like that weird dissociated reverie of the psychopath where they're really not wanting to take on all the material of the environment. Okay, but unfortunately, when we get into that, kind of elevated, sort of on the pedestal, that emotionality that I think psychology wants us to find our salvation in, okay, I think that is an avoidance, okay, because it's easier to go into some ideal, you know, where you're sort of, I think that's a form of splitting, okay, because you're sort of avoiding really just being with all the sensations and all the, I guess, the dissonances and all the unanswered questions of the environment, without having a recipe for how to act, okay, or how to act out your emotions. It's just the unease, the unarticulated unease of things, So, with that in mind, okay, let's go to the story, okay, about the so-called primitive, okay, and let's get in there and let's see what's really happening, okay, because I think the splitting and the rage are totally connected, okay. So, and by the way, if anybody's uncomfortable with the way I am in these videos, the way I describe things, or maybe they don't have any agreement with the way that I see it, first of all, I don't know that I'm right. I'm talking about my experience. I'm talking about how I've been reflecting on cluster B, and I could be totally wrong. This is nothing but just my testimony, you know. And I'm hoping to reach other cluster Bs, But if it doesn't work, and if people really don't relate, maybe these videos, maybe they are garbage, And if you feel like this doesn't make any sense, these probably aren't very good videos, But I am trying to describe something, and maybe hopefully this will reach one or two people. I mean, I hope so. But anyway, but maybe not, But I want to try to get into that connection between rage and splitting. Okay. And actually, if you watch my other videos, you can already figure out what I'm going to say because I've said it, but I just want to make it more, just more a point of this video. So basically, what I see, as the basic core, that produces the rage and the splitting, okay, is a basic fundamental irritability. Okay, it's a fundamental irritability. And if you're to ask me, why is a person irritable? Why is a person irritable? Well, it could be a little bit that you're sort of programmed from an early age to sort of really tease out that irritability. It could be that if you're in an environment where your parents are not taking care of you, okay, I could see that you're overactive in your like as a baby. If you're a baby that's not getting your needs met, okay, I can see that you're crying way too much. You're way too activated, okay, and you might be from an early age. You might be overactivating certain parts of your brain, okay, that later on are going to remain hyperactive as a result of that early experience. So in that sense, even though I try to avoid talking about trauma because I think we tend to overestimate trauma, and I think we tend to use trauma kind of in this weird political way where we sort of idealize all the landscape around it. But actually, I can see this. I can see that in the machine language sense. Okay, when your parents are not really taking care of you, okay, you could sort of get hyperactive and just being way overactivated, way distressed, too much distress, okay, and then you might be left with a hyperactive, permanent hyperactive state of irritability. Okay, that may be true. Okay, but see the problem with that, and the reason why I almost feel irresponsible to say that is because maybe you can be born with an irritable temperament, okay, so that yeah, if your parents aren't meeting your needs, but you're already also born with an excessive irritability, so that it's sort of a combination of your parents not taking care of you, but also you may have your own temperament that's sort of adding gasoline to that hyperactive thing. So I think it's always going to be a little bit unknown, because no matter how bad your parents treat you, okay? And your parents could treat you very badly, okay? But no matter how bad they treat you, no matter how bad they don't take care of you when you're very young, okay, there may also be some innate irritability that you were also born with, that's sort of adding together to make this sort of hyperactive irritability, okay? So I think, in fairness, we'll never know the actual percentages of how much you're born with, how much is by circumstance, But I am open. I am totally open that there could be something in the way you're treated as a kid and the environment you're in that could overactivate your irritability, okay, your the distress, and that could sort of flood the brain with all kinds of configurations that is not going to set up a good neurology, okay, for the future. Okay, I'm not denying that. Okay, I just want to reserve more reserve, okay, that we'll never know what is also the percentage of our inherited, sort of our genetic, let's say, our inherited irritability. Okay, that may play a big part of it. Okay, so I just want to kind of never answer that question fully because we'll never really know. Okay, but I'm not a denier that abuse can lead to and does contribute to the way we get into a bad neurological state. Okay, so there's no denial. I just don't want to pretend to know the percentages, and I think we probably don't want to pretend to know that because we never like. I'm going to admit something, and I'm sorry. This is probably the worst video I've ever made. So if anybody who's not patient watching this, please feel free to watch something else. This is probably not even a good video, but let me talk about my experience. Okay, like I know that I'm a very irritable person. Okay, I don't know how much of it is because my parents treated me a certain way. Okay, but I have my brother and sister. Okay, my brother and sister were raised in the same house, and they were probably exposed maybe to more chaos than I was. Okay, because when I came along, I was just the only child, and actually my grandmother was able to take care of me a lot, and my mom didn't have to have so much. My mom didn't have so much burden as a mother. She had a lot of help when I was born. Okay, but when my brother and sister were born, they're twins. Okay, and my mom no longer had my grandmother to help out so much, and my mom had to quit her job for 2 years to take care of my brother and sister. So it was much more strain on the family. And so actually, when my brother and sister were born, it was way more chaotic. Okay. Now you could argue my mom was able to breastfeed my brother and sister. I'll admit that that's a factor, but there was also more chaos. And my mom has a terrible temper. So my brother and sister were around my mom very intimately, with all her ups and downs. And so I think when you add everything up, I think my brother and sister were exposed, I think, to basically the same amount of chaos, the same amount of, whatever. Um, and also my mom is cluster B, so she's not going to tend to a kid, the same way as a normal person. So I think it's fair to say that we were all exposed to relatively the same amount of, let's say misattunement or parental, misattunement, whatever, mistreatment, not having our needs met. And yet my brother and sister, they have their issues, okay, but they are much less irritable than I am, okay. And also I've noticed that when I get, like, say, viruses, and when I'm exposed to, like, say, toxins, my body is more inflammatory than my brother and sister. I tend to get, like, I've had a long COVID. I've never talked about it on these videos, but I've had long COVID for on and off for more than 2 years. Okay, and so my body is very inflammatory. I'm a very irritable person, even at the cellular tissue level. Yeah, my brother and sister are not like that. You know, so, like, okay, so I mean, I'm not saying I know the answer, but I really leave it on the table how much of it is my inherited, let's say, vulnerable. Like, I just may just be my temperament may just be genetically very irritable. Okay, so just leave it there. But the other thing too is that my mother, she smoked and drank when she was pregnant with me. Okay, so you could call that child abuse, but the bottom line is that when I was born, I might have had some effects of my mom drinking and smoking, and also my mom did not want to have me. So that whole pregnancy was an unwanted pregnancy. So there may be a lot of when you're pregnant with a kid that you don't want, there may be a lot of hormones that are in the cocktail that are maybe just not healthy for the baby. Okay, I leave that. So basically, by the time I was born, before my mom ever had contact with me in real life, just being born, I was probably already maybe compromised, from those different factors. Plus, maybe just my own genetic makeup. Not every baby that's born to a smoking mother is always going to be in bad shape. It's just it's probabilities, but um, you know, so I guess I'll never know, and I don't think it's healthy for me to overestimate one factor over the other. I think I probably just have an unknown combination of how I was treated and also my natural irritability, But anyway, just given all that, once you are in a position, whether from mistreatment or a combination of mistreatment and genetics, okay, once you are sufficiently irritable, okay, and you have sort of a distress program, like your brain is sort of programmed to always be kind of in distress, okay, I think that causes everything. Okay, I think that causes the splitting, and I think it explains the rage. Okay, now why does it cause the splitting? Okay, is it just because it's primitive? Oh, it's because I'm in a primitive place. No, it's there's machine language to explain that. Okay, basically, I I think it's pretty clear. I mean, I hope it's clear that the human mind has the weird ability to, I mean, how would you say, when you're processing the reality in front of you, okay, there are lots of factors, okay, that sort of weigh down on you, okay. So in other words, like say, if I'm a child, I have to deal with the dissonance that sometimes my mom's in a good mood, sometimes my mom's in a bad mood, and that's like a lot to sort of, it burdens you. It's sort of like the dissonances take up your attention. They sort of they weigh down on you. It's like a burden. And so I think from a very early age we learn instinctively to sort of dissociate from too many factors that are sort of leaving too much question in the air. Too much uncertainty, too much. It's nauseating to have too much uncertainty. You kind of want clarity. So I think that I believe that when when we already tend to be irritable, okay, we're not very tolerant of a lot of dissonant factors in the air, okay. And so like I can't handle my mom sometimes being good, sometimes being bad. It's like how do I add those things? I don't want to do the math, you know. And I think that thing of like not wanting to do the math, not wanting to just hang there with all that, contradictory stuff, I think very, very slowly, I think we start to we have the ability to sort of dissociate and sort of take off the table all these competing elements that just sort of weigh us down because we don't like that uneasiness of not having a clean answer. Okay. And now we're not conscious of this. This is totally instinctual. But I think that the human mind has the ability to sense a lot of burden from a lot of competing information, let's say. And it's sort of like a lot of noise that's just cluttering our brain. And we like to sort of clean the picture and sort of take all those things off the table, okay, and sort of simplify. And it's sort of like going into a comfort zone where there's less factors in the air, okay? And so it's almost like a comfort zone that we sort of slip into, and we do it completely natively. This is not something we think about. There's no thinking. Um, so I think that the splitting is the result of going into a comfort zone because there's too much noise in the air, too much noise, too many factors, too many conflicting informations. Okay. And we like to kind of simplify the noise and just go into the comfortable place where there's less on the table, there's less factors on the table. Okay. So basically, the splitting is the result of just not having a lot of factors to be processing. Okay. Basically, we degrade the dialectical processing because we can't handle all the noise of it. It's irritating. Okay. It's kind of like, say, if you're in a conversation, like saying you're in a party, okay, there are people who love to be in a conversation with like five people in a circle, five voices, all these voices talking over each other. Other people can't stand it. They just can't stand it. I like to talk one on one. I like to talk one on one. Okay. Yeah, are we really conscious that, oh, okay, I don't like, how conscious are we of what's really happening? I don't think we're thinking like, oh, I'm not a person who likes to have a lot of factors on my plate. And so I want to have less factors on my plate. It's not that. I think people just inside, they just know, I don't like being around a lot of people talking. It's just, I get confused. I prefer to talk one on one. It's more natural. It's more vernacular. But I think in the machine language, what it is I think some of us just do not tolerate a lot of dissonant, noisy, cluttered space, and we like to have things more simple. Okay, I think it's really just that. Okay, but the more irritable you are, I think the more you're not going to tolerate that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? So basically, the same irritability that we call the primitive rage, is the same irritability that's not going to tolerate too much noise in the environment, too much conflicting stuff. And so the splitting is basically kind of like me wanting just to talk to one-on-one person. I like a more simplified plate. Okay. And when you only have a simplified plate, you get a more cartoonish view of reality. You see things more cartoonish because you're not really weighing all the real pixels. I go back to the pixelation. You don't want all the pixelation because it's too noisy for you. So you just like that low pixelation, and low pixelation basically is more cartoonish, more exaggerated, more split. And so things come out more split, and so then your fantasies come out more grandiose. When you put people down, they seem more exaggerated how you put them down. And then let's go to the ASPD. Um, the ASPD is not conscious of this, but like say if you see a watch, I like that watch. God, you see a watch, like say in a store, and I might for a second think, God, I'd love to have that watch, or geez, sucks that I don't know if I could pay $100 for that watch. Maybe deep down inside of me, there's a part of me that could think like I just take the watch. I mean, something it would just be the most fleeting idea. But the problem with the ASPD is like he doesn't want to clutter his mind with all these factors like, oh God, I'd have to pay for it, I have to do this, I have to do that. It's more simplified. Okay, so that's also splitting. Okay, because you're oversimplifying the factors of a moment. And so they're not really part of the reason why they'll just take the watch and steal it, is because they're not burdened by all the different factors of reality of, what does it mean to be a person who steals? What's it going to mean if I get caught? Like they'll think about it, but it's diminished because it's kind of like all the voices in the circle. They're not the kind of person that wants to talk to 10 people, whatever. The brain wants a more simplified plate. Okay, so they're balanced what they're weighing, the pros and cons. They only have like 3 or 4 factors when you should have like 20, you know. And so I think that and that's the irritability, that restless irritability. You can't handle all the noise because it's just like I don't want to live a life like that, doing all that math, thinking about these factors. You know what I mean? So basically, you could call that primitive, but primitive is just a word. Why not do the machine language and talk about irritability? It's not hard to do, okay? And see that irritability and intolerance of too many dissonances in the environment, those are connected, okay? If you tend to be very irritable, you're not going to tolerate a lot of competing voices and mosquitoes and issues in the air. And you're going to see life with less pixelation. Your matrix, like say the math of your matrix, is going to have less data pouring through it because it's just too much of a pain in the ass. you know. So basically, if there's one like say deep common element, that explains this whole thing, it's the irritability and a tendency to go to a comfort zone. Okay. And our comfort zone is less information pouring through our processor, you know, it's just that. And so when you have less information pouring through your processor, okay, because that's your comfort zone, okay, that is the split because you have less pixelation. And basically then everything is more cartoonish, all right? It's more simplified. And, it's easy to use the word primitive, okay? But there's a reason for the primitive. It's not because you're baby primitive. I'm baby. I want to be baby. I want to be simple. No, it's because you have irritability that doesn't let you tolerate lots of torrents of matrix mathematics. You know what I mean? Like your matrix, too much data. Basically, irritability makes it too much of a hassle to have too much data pouring through your processor. You know what I mean? It burdens you. And so that's what I was talking about the earlier video, the environmental taxation of all the burden, of all the data raining through. Some of us don't want to clutter our processor with all that data because it's just like, ugh, it's a grind, it's a grind. And even babies have to live the grind, oh my God, my dad, this, 1 minute he's that, 1 minute he's that, this and that, 1 minute I'm hungry, 1 minute I'm not getting the food I want, just like simplify, go to the easier place, less data. And yeah, we don't, it's not a strategy, it's instinct. It just happens, when you're more irritable, you go to a happy place where there's less data to burden your mind. And I think that really, really explains a lot of cluster B, you know. And I do encourage people to see more the machine language, okay, and not be afraid that you're turning into a psychopath, okay, because you go there feeling everything, okay, but real feelings, okay, are not the pedestal emotionality that we put on, in the temple of emotional glory. real feelings are just, it's kind of like just, it just feels like just unease, you know. So anyway, just my opinion is that this is probably the worst video that's ever been made on YouTube, but I appreciate you guys watching. Thanks.